Here. I'm talking about how to plan a whole year's worth of sermons ahead of time. I've been doing this for quite a while, and I usually do it in October or November. So this past October, I did it for the coming year. It reduces stress tremendously. Before I started doing this, I would periodically have these weeks where I spent half the week vacillating on what text I was going to preach on, and didn't even get down to actually studying and writing the sermon until late in the week. It also helps me, this is the big one for me, it helps me be more intentional and prayerful and balanced about my preaching. I think we all have favorite parts of the Bible. We all have favorite subjects that we keep coming back to over and over again, like our grandpa kept coming back to the same old stories over and over again. And this helps me to get a bird's eye view of what I'm going to preach for the next year and make sure it's balanced, make sure I'm covering a variety of parts of the scriptures and topics. It also helps my worship leader to plan. He's able to plan ahead and know what kind of music to use to tie into the sermon series. And it also helps my sermon prep on a weekly basis, because I'm not just planning what I'm going to preach on, I'm also planning the direction I'm going to take with each text. So I'll get to that in a minute, but I've got kind of an 8-step process, and this is on the document I posted there. My email's on there too, so if you take a look at this and you have any questions, shoot them my way. I'd love to help you in any way. So the first step is to prepare ahead of time. Like I said, I do this prep in the fall, but back in the summer, so weeks ahead of time, I'm already making a list of potential things that I think our church needs to hear. All through the year, in fact, I keep a running document if I'm studying scripture in my quiet time, or I'm listening to a sermon podcast and I think, my congregation needs to hear this subject or this text or this book of the Bible. And I know I can't do it this year. I'll write it on that list and think, okay, let me pray about that for next year. But I also talk to my church leaders in the weeks before I do my prep time, and I ask them questions. I ask them, what are the issues that you see our people individually dealing with? Is it grief? Is it anxiety? Is it decision making? Is it temptation in this area or that area? Where would you like to see our church grow? And what is the direction you see God taking us right now? What do you think God is doing in our presence right now? And that gives me some broad themes that I can work with. So for instance, let's say one of the themes would be the unity of the church, that we want to be one as Father and Son are one. So I'll write that down. We need a series on unity this next year. So second step is I need to find time and a place to get away. And I know you're immediately thinking, I don't have time and I don't have a place, but you can do it. You can make time. And this is really important. Don't try to do this on your regular schedule. You take at least a day. 2 or 3 days is even better, but I recognize that might be impossible for some of you guys, especially co-vocational guys. But if you can take a single day, even a Saturday, and then get away somewhere. I've used church members that have a vacation house. I've shamelessly begged them for the use of that for a few days. One year, I didn't have any other option than just to go to the public library, but that worked, to just get away from the normal place where you are, from your family and your responsibilities, and tell your fellow church leaders so they know why you're not returning their calls that day, but get away for a time. And then my first step when I'm away is I take several sheets of typing paper. I just physically write out a calendar. So, January 1st, January 8th, January 15th, January 22nd, and on down the line until I get all 52 Sundays on a sheet of paper. And then I write in to those dates the Sundays that I know are special Sundays, like Easter, the day our choir is going to sing Christmas songs all day. The beginning of school, the end of school, spring break, any dates that I think are going to impact sermon series. If there's a day out of the year when y'all have a special veterans recognition or some other special program, maybe you combine with an African American church on a particular Sunday a year, make sure that's on there, because you want to know, you don't want to break up a sermon series, right? You want to know, you want to see those big blocks ahead of time. And then once you've got your calendar written out, that's when you start building sermon series. So I take a separate sheet of paper and I write those broad themes down that I've been compiling for the last several weeks. And I start coming up with series, potential series for each of those topics. So if I want a series on unity in the family of God, I think to myself, well, there's 59 one another's in the New Testament. So I just pull out my New Testament, I look up all 59. And I'm not going to do all 59, right? My church that would be the opposite of unity, that I'll quit. So I figure, okay, which are the ones that I think are going to be most impactful for my church in our particular context? And let's say I come up with 10. So that's a series of 10 sermons right there. I just write down those 10 texts, and then I move on to my next step. Then I start plugging those series into the calendar. And this is where it gets actually tricky. Up till now, this stuff is going to come naturally, but to plug those things in there takes some finagling. It takes some cutting. So let's say I've got my 10 sermon series on unity, and I want to do it at the beginning of the year, but then I notice, oh no, that's going to mean that I'm going to have to cut 2 out of that one in order to fit in the other series that I want to do about the cross right before Easter. So, okay, which one of these 10 do I cut out? Which 2 of these 10 do I cut out? So that takes some thought, some prayer, and it's a little painful, but you get that down into where it fits, and you start plugging each of those texts into your dates until you've got 52 filled Sundays in a calendar year. And for the first few years I did this, that's where I stopped. And it was helpful, there's no doubt. But then I started going one step further, and it's made all the difference for me. And that next step, that step 6, is to actually, once I've got all my texts calendared, to go through each one of them and just spend a little time planning how I'm going to preach that text. This is when it went from 1 day to 3 days for me, because this takes some time. You actually have to sit with that passage of scripture, meditate on it, think through it, and just come up with a 1 or 2 sentence description. Galatians 6:2, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. Well, that's my first one another. How am I gonna preach that? What do my people need to hear about that? And so I come up with a 1 or 2 sentence description of what bearing one another's burdens looks like at First Baptist Conroe. And that way, that next January, when I go to preach on that particular text, I'm not sitting there fumbling around figuring out a direction to go as I plan my sermon. It's already been established. Now, do I ever change course in the middle of a year? Yes. Are there times when, even after all this meticulous planning, I get to that week and I pull that particular sermon title up and I go, that doesn't seem right for what's going on in my church right now. Yeah, that happens probably once or twice a year, but it's still been worth it for me for the other 40 some odd Sundays. I even come up with titles, but titles aren't probably as important for you if you don't have a written bulletin or something like that. But I find that to be a very, very helpful step. And then after that, the next step is I email that whole list. By now I've got this beautiful little formatted sheet. I actually at that point transfer it all to a Word document on my computer, and I email it to the other leaders in my church, and I ask them to look it over and tell me what they think. And usually at least somebody comes back with, well, Jeff, don't you remember we said that in the middle of July we were going to do this? And I go, oh yeah, I forgot. Or, hey, this sermon you're going to preach in March, you preached on that exact same text last year. Oh, well, thanks. I didn't realize that. So that's a helpful step, to give that to them and let them give me some feedback, and also give them the opportunity to know where we're headed. This is part of your leadership as a pastor, is showing them this is where I'm trying to take us through the teaching ministry God has given us. and they can be praying along with you. And then, of course, the last step is to pray over each one of those, and just to pray not only for yourself, but that God would prepare your people to hear these. When I come out of this is one of the best weeks of the year for me, not just because I get away from everybody. That's also fun for a while, but mainly because I end the week and I'm so excited about the year to come. I mean, it's October or November, and I already can't wait for January because I can't wait to preach these series. And I want you to experience that as well. And you're excited, and so you begin to pray, Lord, this is what I believe you want your people to hear. This is the change I believe you want to make in your people. I pray that you would prepare them for it, prepare me to preach it well. And as you're praying, ask him, what can I do besides just preaching? You know, is there a book that I can recommend that they read along with it? Is there maybe we need to have a prayer meeting the Wednesday before we start this, where I just invite the whole church to come and we gather and pray over the unity of God's family? Or is there a life group curriculum I can recommend to our Sunday school classes? Probably, if you're like me, you don't have the power to insist they all use the same curriculum, but maybe you do, and you can impose that on them. But pray about and think about ways to enhance and accentuate each one of these series. And I think you're going to be excited about the opportunities that lie ahead.